Did you witness any disc technology at Area 51?
No, there was absolutely no ET craft, ET technology, anything like that at Area 51. This is why S4 was made specifically to separate it there. People at Area 51 do not have the clearance.
How long were you employed at S4, and when were you hired?
When was I hired at S4? I guess early '89, and I was probably there only about 6 months or so, on a very infrequent basis.
When did you see your first disc?
The first disc I saw, I believe it was the second, or I think it was the third time I was up there. Normally the bus pulled around to the opposite end of the facility, which was the main entrance, and that's where we went in. On this particular occasion, it pulled up to one of the hangar doors, which were normally closed, and the last one was open. We came out, and I saw the disc in the hangar. Upon seeing it, it struck me that, well, this explains all the UFO sightings. Not thinking that it was an extraterrestrial craft, that this must have been some advanced form of fighter that we've been working on for years, and, you know, people have just caught it being tested, so on and so forth. And it never even occurred to me, even though I was looking at an extraterrestrial vehicle, that, you know, this wasn't man-made.
When did you realize the craft was not of earthly origin?
Well, it probably really hit me when I got inside the craft and looked around and began to understand how the craft was operated, and finally grasped the whole project as a whole, as what we were doing, the fact that we weren't building this thing, we were trying to find out how it was made. We were back engineering it.
What is back engineering?
Well, back engineering is taking a finished product and finding out how the device or product was produced, and essentially determining whether or not you can duplicate it.
Now, scientists aside, what was your emotional response? What were you thinking were the implications to the world or man in general from these revelations?
I really didn't think about implications of that sort. As far as emotionally, people have asserted that, boy, that must have been the most exciting time in your life, and that's not the way it was. When I first got to look inside the craft, all I can say, it's an ominous feeling. You walk in there, and it feels as if you shouldn't be there. I know that sounds kind of corny, but it's a real ominous feeling. It's not an exciting feeling. It brings up a whole lot of questions in your mind. Well, where did this come from? And you know that they won't give you the answers to the whole story, but it's that's the only way I can describe it. It produces a gravity wave, which is similar to the gravity wave that the Earth produces. However, the craft phase shifts the wave. In other words, it turns the wave not really in an opposite polarity, but something to that effect, where it will work against the natural gravity wave of the Earth, and it produces lift in that effect.
Is there any internal protection for the crew? Does the craft generate a gravitational field inside the craft itself?
Well, the craft generates its own gravitational field. Being inside that field essentially doesn't shield you, but essentially you're in, and this is a terrible way to say it, almost in a different realm, because you're now influenced only by that gravitational field. For instance, people wonder how a craft like this can make a turn at such high speed, a 90-degree turn, when they would imagine people slamming up against the wall or something to that effect. Well, that really wouldn't happen. Inertia would have no effect. You're in a distortion. And don't forget that gravity distorts time and space, so really nothing is going to influence you while you're in there.
But one of the investigators is still shaken by what he heard.
I was looking for all the little signs, the body language, if you will. There was tremendously positive eye contact. There was no fidgeting around, and he never deviated. We covered it several different ways. I asked the same question several different ways, and his answers were always the same. Hooking up, going through the test, then started the emotional roller coaster that I experienced that night. And it's something that I can honestly say has changed my whole outlook on things. We started the first test, and it went exactly the way I thought it might. He was not doing well. He was reacting to the relevant questions more than he was to the control type of questions, which is indicative of a person who is deceptive, because it's showing an emotion that he does not feel comfortable with his answers. These questions bother him. It was basically, have you ever observed a saucer-shaped craft fly out at Area 51? And that was asked, I think, 2 or 3 different times. The second chart we ran was on another question dealing with the gravity amplifier or an antimatter reactor as part of the powertrain. About halfway through that test, I'm looking down, and all of a sudden the realization sets in that I'm looking at a probable, truthful result. And I mean, I'm getting chills right now talking about it, because that's what I got. On every chart that I did, the one relevant question that was the same with every test was the last one. Have you deliberately lied to any question concerning the UFO information you've given me? And his answer of no was indicated as being truthful on the charts. So whatever he told me that night, Bob Lazar truly believes to be the truth.
In 1989, I met Robert Lazar, and the story he told me was an incredible one by any standards. I thought that if, in fact, any of this stuff checks out, it may be the biggest story in history. For myself and the TV station, the key to his credibility, the key to his story was always Los Alamos, because if he worked at Los Alamos, if he worked in classified projects, it is at least conceivable that he would have been brought to Nevada to work in other classified projects. As a test on his veracity, we wanted to go to Los Alamos and have him show us around. He said, I can get you in. That, yeah, we'll believe this when we see it. So we were there on a weekend. Fewer people are in the lab, and Bob, in fact, did take us in. And it was like following him through this labyrinth of different labs and facilities, and he knew his way around like a rabbit in its own burrow. He knew where everything was, and that impressed me, because how would he know if he hadn't been there? Los Alamos was uncooperative from the first day. Years and years went by, and I still couldn't get any confirmation from them that Bob had ever worked there. It makes no sense. They'd have no records on someone who worked there just a few years before, but that's what they were telling me. Now, I had interviewed other people that worked with Bob there who say that he was an employee, he was a physicist, and he worked in classified projects. If that were the case, where are the records? Because to this day, we still can't find them. What this tells me is that someone has tried to wipe out Bob's background so that fewer people will give him any credibility.
I don't know. Sometimes I really do regret it, and I almost feel like apologizing to him, saying that, you know, I'm sorry I let things out. Can I have my job back?
25 years after he was forever transformed into Bob the UFO guy, Bob Lazar says he regrets ever talking about flying saucers or a secret base in the Nevada desert or any of the things that made his name known all over the world.
If there isn't a day I don't get emails, and, you know, I try and get this across to him. Look, I don't even want to talk about it anymore. You know, well, I don't believe the story. Great, pass it around. You know, I really don't want you to, because it makes life difficult for me.
Look how bright it's getting. Look at it now.
For a variety of personal reasons, Lazar couldn't keep the story to himself. He shared his tale with John Lear and Gene Huff. They and a few others made treks out to the outskirts of S4 because Lazar said he'd learned when the test flights of the saucer would take place. 3 weeks in a row, a glowing object appeared over the mountain.
Look how bright it's getting. Look at it now.
And just a few minutes ago, we saw one of the government extraterrestrial UFOs.
The time when Bob said there would be a test, there was a strange light jumping around in the sky above the location where he said it would be at the time and date he said it would be.
You know, here, the craft took off when I said it was taking off from past the mountain range, which was Papoose Lake, S4, south of Area 51, you know, in a restricted area. So it's not like anyone was out there with a model plane or anything. And, you know, flew around, did incredible maneuvers that impressed everybody, to the point where we got scared and got behind a car, fearing the thing was going to explode. But really, how do you explain that?
It's bright right now.
and the stampede he started back in 1989 when he told of working at S4 south of Area 51, where he saw flying saucers so advanced they had to be from somewhere else. This is a model of the reactor he says was able to generate its own gravitational field, powered by what he called Element 115.
Barry turned on the reactor, which was a flat plate and half of a basketball essentially on it, just a hemisphere. And once it was activated, you could not touch the sphere. You put your hand on it, and just like the like poles of a magnet, exact same type of force. He had a little golf ball, and we dropped it on it, and it never hit the sphere and fell off, and then we threw it at it and it rebounded and knocked the ceiling tile out of place. But it was that alone is something amazing. Look, that can change everything we know today. Just having a machine to produce artificial gravity. Because look at what that does. We know gravity, space, and time are all tied together. There are your shields, like on Star Trek, that deflect micrometeorites. There is your protection from radiation without heavy shielding. There is something that, with an intense enough focused field, you can actually bend space, and there is something that can actually alter the flow of time. I mean, that's the missing piece of pie.
Didn't they actually freeze
a candle?
A flame for
yeah, now that's when it was connected to the gravity amplifiers where they could focus it, and
They froze a candle?
Yeah, they had a candle lit to set it up for you. Again, there's a large, in the craft itself, there are 3 long pipes. I'd say, well, I don't know about, what's that, 3-4 feet in diameter, maybe 5 feet long. Anyway, they dangle, the 3 of them, at the bottom of the craft. These produce gravitational waves, and they can focus them to a point or spread them apart.
Those are what you call the wave guides?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. They're part of the power source control mechanism and the wave, well, the waveguide is what I actually call the interlink between them, but that's the gravitational engine. They had one of those devices out along with the subsystem that connects it. So they can produce the power from the reactor, it runs the gravity amplifier, and they can focus and change the gravity beam that comes out of it. They took, speaking of Barry, took a candle, put it close to the mouth of it, lit it, a normal flickering candle flame, and then activated the reactor. The gravity wave came out as expected, and the candle flame remained luminous and stopped moving. And
which defies physics.
Yeah, because look, if it's going to freeze it, the photons should stop being emitted. If it's going to, change the characteristics. Look, how can the combustion continue to take place without the convection inside the flame? Because actually, the reason a flame is elongated is not really because of heat, it's because of gravity. Because gravity pulls down and, convection moves flames upward. It's why in a zero gravity environment, flame is a ball. Obviously, there's nothing to pull things around. But anyway, if you negate the gravity around it, why is it still pointy? How can it still be making light? And why doesn't it move? Well, I mean, from what Barry said, it's not just gravity, but it's also time locked. You've distorted the
frame of time.
Yeah, they essentially froze a piece of time there, and what do you say? I mean, it's empirical evidence. You're looking at it. It's not a.
Could see it.
It doesn't make sense that you could see it. And look, the stuff I saw there was the most unbelievable, literally, because it defied what we knew as physics. And at least I thought it did. And maybe what we knew was a little incorrect and just needed viewing from a different